The grease under Andre Dre Jackson's fingernails was a stubborn ghost. No matter how hard he scrubbed with the orange-scented industrial soap, the black lines remained, a permanent tattoo of a life spent working with his hands. But now, those hands were idle. They rested on the worn Formica tabletop of their small South Side Chicago apartment, twitching with the phantom memory of tightening bolts and turning wrenches. The silence in the apartment was louder than any impact driver. It was the sound of mounting bills, of the eviction notice tucked under the fruit bowl, of a future shrinking into a pinhole of light. Across from him, his wife Amanda stirred a cup of instant coffee, the spoon clinking a frantic rhythm against the ceramic. She wasn't looking at him, but he could feel her anxiety radiating across the table like heat. 5 years they'd been married, and for 4 of them, his hands had provided. They'd built a life, not a lavish one, but one filled with the quiet dignity of hard work. Then, 2 months ago, the garage had been bought out by a corporate chain. Restructuring, the new manager, a fresh-faced white kid in a crisp polo shirt, had called it. But Dre knew the code. He'd seen the way the manager's eyes had flicked over him, the only black mechanic in the shop, before landing on the less experienced but paler faces he chose to keep. "Anything?" Amanda asked, her voice tight. Dre shook his head, pushing aside the classified section of the Sun-Times. "Same old. Everyone wants a master tech certification I don't have, or they're paying minimum wage. Can't cover rent on that, let alone the lights." The contrast between their life now and the one they'd dreamed of was a physical ache in his chest. They were supposed to be saving for a small house in a better neighborhood, a place with a yard, a place where the sound of sirens wasn't a nightly lullaby. Now, they were drowning in the grimy reality of their zip code, a world away from the gleaming high-rises of the Loop that glittered mockingly in the distance. The buzz of his phone was a welcome interruption, an unknown number. He answered, and a familiar voice, slick with a confidence Dre hadn't heard in years, slid through the speaker. "Dre, my man, it's Tony." Dre's knuckles went white. Tony. They'd grown up together, but their paths had split violently after high school. While Dre had chosen the steady path of honest work, Tony had danced along the edges of the law, always chasing the fast dollar. "What do you want, Tony?" Dre asked, his voice flat. "Heard you were in a tight spot, man. I got a little something for you." "An opportunity," Tony said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Easy money. Real easy." Against his better judgment, Dre agreed to meet him at a nearby corner bar. The place smelled of stale beer and desperation. Tony, looking heavier but draped in the same gaudy gold chains, slid a key across the sticky table. "It's a delivery, simple. A client needs his Mercedes moved up to Milwaukee. Doesn't want the miles on it, something about a lease. He'll pay you $2,000 in cash just to drive it there and drop the key in a lockbox. All legit, papers in the glove box. $2,000. The number echoed in the empty spaces of Dre's bank account. It was a lifeline. It was rent, groceries, and a breath of air. It was a way to see the hope return to Amanda's eyes. "Why me?" Dre asked, suspicious. Tony grinned, a flash of gold in the dim light. "'Cause I know you're a hell of a driver, and I know you're a stand-up guy who can keep his mouth shut, and I heard you could use the help. Just a friend looking out for another friend." The polarization was dizzying. On one hand, every instinct screamed that this was a bad idea, that Tony's world was a place of shadows and consequences. On the other, the stark reality of his situation, the eviction notice, Amanda's worried face, made the gleaming promise of $2,000 feel like salvation. He took the key. Later that night, under the buzzing orange glow of a streetlight in a deserted industrial park, the Mercedes sat waiting. It was a new S-Class, black and menacing. An alien spaceship landed in the urban decay. It felt wrong, too clean, too perfect. He slid behind the wheel, the smell of rich leather, a stark contrast to the stale air of his own beat-up Honda. The engine purred to life with a low growl. This was a different world. The drive out of Chicago was smooth. The city's lights receded in his rearview mirror, and for a moment, Dre allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. This was it. One simple job, and they'd be back on their feet. He could look Amanda in the eye again. But a nagging unease settled in his stomach. No questions asked. Tony's words bounced around in his head. What kind of man pays $2,000 to avoid putting miles on a lease? The paranoia grew with every mile marker that flashed by on I-94. Every pair of headlights in his mirror felt like a threat. He was just a delivery boy, he told himself. The papers were in the glove box, just like Tony said. It was clean. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was a cold knot in his gut that tightened with each passing exit. What if something was in the trunk? A weapon? Something worse? He had to know. He couldn't bring unknown trouble to his doorstep. Pulling over at a deserted rest stop, the only sound the hum of the highway and the chirping of crickets, he killed the engine. The silence was absolute. His heart hammered against his ribs as he got out and walked to the back of the car. The key fob felt slick with sweat in his palm. He pressed the trunk release button. With a soft, hydraulic hiss, the lid rose. His breath caught in his throat. The trunk wasn't empty. Tucked into the corner, wrapped in black plastic and secured with duct tape, was a large, brick-shaped package. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. He'd seen enough movies, heard enough stories from the neighborhood. It was a kilo, maybe more. This wasn't a simple delivery. This was a drug run. He was a mule. Tony hadn't just offered him a job. He'd set him up, using his desperation as bait for the perfect trap. Panic seized him. He slammed the trunk shut, his mind racing. Turn back, ditch the car, call the cops and tell them what? That his shady childhood friend gave him a car full of cocaine? They'd laugh as they snapped the cuffs on him. He had to finish the drive, get rid of the car, take the money, and disappear from Tony's life forever. He fumbled back into the driver's seat, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the wheel. He threw the car into drive and peeled out of the rest stop, tires squealing on the pavement. He was pushing 90, 95. The Wisconsin state line, a beacon of false hope in the distance. Just get there, drop the car, walk away. That's when he saw it. Not in the distance, but right on his tail, emerging from the darkness like a predator. The distinct, terrifying flash of red and blue lights, painting the inside of the pristine Mercedes in strobing colors of doom. The siren's wail cut through the night, a sound that seemed to vibrate in Dre's bones. He pulled the Mercedes onto the shoulder, the gravel crunching under the expensive tires. In the rearview mirror, the police cruiser's flashing lights turned the dark Wisconsin highway into a pulsating nightmare. His mind was a maelstrom of panic and regret. The drugs. The stolen car, because he knew now, with chilling certainty, that it had to be stolen. He was trapped. A Wisconsin state trooper, a tall, broad-shouldered white man with a grim set to his jaw, approached the driver's side window. His flashlight beam cut across Dre's face, blinding him for a moment. "License and registration," the trooper said, his voice a flat, authoritative monotone. His eyes weren't just looking at Dre, they were assessing him, cataloging him. Dre saw the flicker of recognition, the subtle shift in posture that he'd seen 100 times before. A black man in a car too expensive for his presumed station, late at night on a lonely highway. The story wrote itself in the trooper's mind before Dre even opened his mouth. "Officer, I can explain," Dre began, his hands trembling as he reached for the glove box. "Just the license and registration, sir." The trooper cut him off, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. Dre handed over his license and the documents he'd found in the glove box. The trooper examined them under his flashlight, his expression unreadable. "Stay in the vehicle?" He walked back to his cruiser, and Dre's world compressed to the space inside that leather-scented car. He could feel the weight of the cocaine in the trunk, a dense physical presence that was about to crush his life. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He saw the trooper talking on his radio, then another cruiser pulled up behind the first. This wasn't a routine stop. When the trooper returned, a younger officer was with him. The pretense of civility was gone. "Mr. Jackson, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands where I can see them." The cold night air hit Dre as he stepped out onto the gravel. The second officer already had his hand on his weapon. "This vehicle was reported stolen out of a Chicago suburb 3 hours ago," the first trooper said. "We're going to have a look in the trunk." It was over. Dre didn't say a word as they opened the trunk and discovered the package. He didn't resist as they pushed him against the side of the Mercedes, the cold metal pressing against his cheek, and cinched the handcuffs tight around his wrists. The familiar, degrading click of the cuffs was the sound of his future slamming shut. "You have the right to remain silent." The words were a hollow recitation, a formality in a process that already felt predetermined. At the county jail, the interrogation room was a sterile box of cinder blocks and institutional despair. He told them everything about Tony, the phone call, his desperation, the $2,000. The detectives, two more stoic white men, listened with patient skepticism, occasionally exchanging glances. They ran Tony's name. Nothing came up. The phone number Dre had was a burner, now disconnected. Tony had vanished, a ghost who had led him into a cage and then disappeared. So, let me get this straight, the older detective said, leaning back in his chair. A childhood friend you haven't seen in years just happens to call you out of the blue, offers you $2,000 to drive a $100,000 car, which just happens to be stolen and filled with a kilo of cocaine, and you didn't think anything was off. That's your story. It sounded insane. It sounded like the lie of a guilty man. Amanda arrived the next day, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. Seeing her through the plexiglass divider, her image distorted and distant, broke something inside him. Dre, what happened? They said drugs, a stolen car. It was a setup, baby, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Tony, he played me. You have to believe me. And in that moment, she did. Her eyes, filled with tears, were also filled with trust. She promised to get a lawyer to fight this. But they had no money. The lawyer they were assigned was a public defender, a young, well-meaning but hopelessly overwhelmed woman juggling dozens of cases just like his. She laid out the grim reality in a brief, hurried meeting. Andre, your story is difficult. There's no physical evidence linking this Tony to anything. What the prosecution has is you, behind the wheel of a stolen car, with a significant quantity of narcotics. They see a man from the south side of Chicago, unemployed, and they're going to paint a picture. It's not fair, but it's how this works. The trial was a blur of legal jargon and character assassination. The prosecutor, a sharp, ambitious man, did exactly what the public defender had predicted. He didn't just present the evidence, he presented Andre Jackson, the narrative. He spoke of the culture of crime in neighborhoods like the one Dre came from, using his address as a form of circumstantial evidence. He made Dre's desperation sound like criminal intent. Dre sat at the defendant's table, watching as the jury, composed of 10 white faces and 2 black ones that looked just as weary as he felt, absorbed the story. He looked over at Amanda in the front row. Her visits had become less frequent, her phone calls shorter. The unshakable faith in her eyes had been eroded by the grim reality of the courtroom. Now he saw a flicker of something else, something that terrified him more than a guilty verdict. Doubt. She was looking at him, the man she had promised to love and honor, and for the first time, she was wondering if the prosecutor was right. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a severe expression, wouldn't meet his eyes as he handed the verdict to the bailiff. On the charge of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, we the jury find the defendant. A pause. Guilty. On the charge of interstate transport of a stolen vehicle, we the jury find the defendant. Guilty. A gasp escaped Amanda's lips. The sound was small, but to Dre, it was an explosion. He felt the floor drop out from under him. The judge, an impassive woman who looked at him over her reading glasses, spoke of making an example, of the war on drugs, of protecting the community. Mr. Jackson, given the severity of these crimes, I sentence you to a term of no less than 7 and no more than 10 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. You will be transferred to the Statesville Correctional Center to serve your sentence. 7 to 10 years. The numbers were incomprehensible. An entire decade of his life, stolen by a ghost named Tony and a system that was built to believe the worst about him. The bailiffs pulled him to his feet. He turned to look at Amanda one last time. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a horror that was now mingled with that terrible, soul-crushing doubt. As they led him away, her gaze didn't hold the promise of a fight, of unconditional love. It held the devastating question, who have I been married to? That look was a sentence far harsher than the judge's. It was the beginning of a different kind of prison. The gates of Statesville Correctional Center didn't just close behind Andre, they swallowed him whole. The 1920s-era prison was a monstrous fortress of yellowed stone and rusted steel, a place where hope came to die. The air inside was thick with the smell of disinfectant, sweat, and simmering rage. From the moment he stepped off the transport bus, shackled at the wrists and ankles, he was no longer Andre Jackson, husband and mechanic. He was inmate WOB A75391, a number, a commodity in the brutal economy of the penal system. The intake process was a systematic stripping away of identity. His clothes were taken, his body cavity searched with cold, clinical indifference, and he was handed a faded blue jumpsuit that smelled faintly of bleach. The world he knew, the scent of Amanda's hair, the satisfaction of a perfectly tuned engine, the freedom of an open road was gone, replaced by the clang of steel doors and the constant deafening noise of thousands of men caged together. The racial lines on the inside were drawn as clearly as the bars on his cell. The yard was a checkerboard of segregated groups, the Latin Kings, the Aryan Brotherhood, the Gangster Disciples. As a black man unaffiliated with any Chicago gang, he was an unknown quantity, vulnerable and exposed. The guards, mostly white men from the surrounding rural towns, moved with a swaggering authority, their eyes holding a mixture of boredom and contempt. They saw him not as a man who'd been set up, but as another piece of the problem they were paid to contain. His cellmate was a lifer named Pops, an older, wiry man whose face was a roadmap of tough years. Pops had been inside since the 90s and understood the prison's ecosystem better than anyone. He saw the fear and confusion in Dre's eyes on that first night. "Let me give you some advice, young blood," Pops said, his voice a low rumble as he lay on his bunk, staring at the concrete ceiling. "Keep your head down and your mouth shut. Don't gamble, don't borrow, don't owe nobody nothing. Find a routine. Work, yard time, chow. Let the time serve you, don't you serve the time." Dre took the advice to heart. He got a job in the prison auto shop, a small mercy. The familiar feel of a wrench in his hand was grounding. He could lose himself for hours fixing the guards' personal vehicles and the prison's transport vans. The meticulous works a balm for his racing mind. But the relief was temporary. Every night, locked in the 6-by-9-foot cell, the reality of his sentence crashed down on him. 7 years, a lifetime. For the first 6 months, Amanda was his anchor. Every other Saturday, she made the long, arduous drive from Chicago. The visiting room was a chaotic, miserable place, filled with crying children and strained conversations shouted over the din. Seeing her was both a blessing and a curse. Her presence was a reminder of the life he had lost, and the 20-foot wall of plexiglass between them was a symbol of the chasm that had opened in their marriage. "I'm looking into appeals," she'd say, her voice tinny through the phone receiver. "The lawyer said it's a long shot, but we have to try." He would nod, trying to inject hope he didn't feel into his voice. "How are things at the apartment? Are you okay with the rent?" "I'm managing," she'd say, a little too quickly. "I got a promotion at the insurance firm, assistant manager. The pay is better." He tried to be proud of her, but a cold sliver of fear lodged itself in his heart. She was moving on, building a life without him, a life he was no longer a part of. The visits became less frequent. First, it was once a month. Then, an urgent work project came up. Then, her car had trouble. Each excuse was plausible, but together they formed a pattern of withdrawal. Her letters, once filled with declarations of love and promises to wait, became shorter, more perfunctory updates about her job and the weather. The world inside the prison walls was brutal, but it was the erosion of his connection to the outside world that truly broke him down. He was becoming a ghost in his own life. One bleak afternoon in January, about a year into his sentence, the mail guard dropped a single envelope onto his bunk. It was different from Amanda's usual letters. The envelope was cheap, the address written in an unfamiliar, spiky script. There was no return address. His heart hammered as he tore it open. Inside, there was no letter. Just a single photograph printed on glossy paper. It was Amanda. She was seated at a table in a fancy restaurant, the kind they could have never afforded. The tablecloth was white, the wine glasses sparkling. She was laughing, her head thrown back in a gesture of pure, unadulterated joy he hadn't seen since before his arrest. Sitting across from her, his hand resting casually near hers on the table, was a man. He was handsome, white, dressed in a sharp suit. They weren't touching, not explicitly, but the intimacy between them was palpable. It was in the way he looked at her, The way her smile was directed solely at him. Dre stared at the photo, the sounds of the cell block fading into a dull roar in his ears. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just the image of her with another man. It was the look on her face. She was happy, genuinely, radiantly happy. A happiness he could no longer provide, a happiness that existed in a world from which he had been violently excised. He didn't know who sent it. A friend from the outside? A rival trying to mess with his head? It didn't matter. The image was burned into his mind. He could taste the bitter poison of betrayal, a venom far more potent than the injustice that had put him behind bars. He had lost his freedom, his name, his future. Now he was losing the one thing he thought would always be his. He was losing Amanda, and the photograph in his trembling hand was the proof. This anonymous, cruel piece of paper was the first shovel of dirt on the grave of the man he used to be. The photograph became a toxic obsession. Dre would stare at it for hours in the dim light of his cell, dissecting every detail. The man's expensive watch. The way Amanda's hair was styled differently, more sophisticated. The background, which spoke of a world of wealth and ease he could now only dream of. The seed of doubt, planted in the courtroom, had been watered by this anonymous delivery, and it was now sprouting into a thorny vine of paranoia and rage that was wrapping itself around his heart. He confronted Amanda about it during her next visit, holding the picture up to the plexiglass. "Who is this, Amanda?" Her face went pale. For a moment she was speechless, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Dre, where did you get that?" "That doesn't matter. Who is he?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "He's just a colleague," she stammered, avoiding his gaze. "Spencer Reed. We were celebrating a new account at work. It was a group dinner. That picture, someone must have taken it out of context to hurt you." Her explanation was plausible, but her reaction told a different story. The way her eyes darted away, the tremor in her hand as she clutched the phone receiver. It was the performance of a bad liar. The invisible wall between them suddenly felt solid, impenetrable. He knew she was lying, and she knew that he knew. The rest of the visit was a strained, hollow affair. The old intimacy was gone, replaced by a cold, formal courtesy. When he got back to his cell, Pops took one look at his face and knew. "It's the wife, ain't it?" he said, not as a question. Dre just nodded, slumping onto his bunk. "Happens to the best of us, kid," Pops said with a sigh. "Life on the outside don't stop just 'cause ours does. She's young, she's alone. It's a cold world out there." Pops' sympathy felt more like a confirmation of his fears than a comfort. Dre needed more than speculation. He needed the truth, no matter how ugly. He approached a fellow inmate from the auto shop, a quiet guy named Rico, who had deep connections to his old neighborhood. Rico ran a small-time contraband network inside, and for a price. A month's worth of commissary funds, and a promise to look after his cousin's car when Dre got out. He agreed to have someone on the outside keep an eye on Amanda. The waiting was a special kind of hell. Every day that passed without word was another day spent imagining the worst. He replayed every conversation with Amanda from the past year, searching for clues he'd missed, her new, expensive clothes. Just treating myself after the promotion. The late nights at the office. This new account is really demanding. The canceled visits. The weather's too bad to drive. Each memory was now tainted, recontextualized as a lie, a cover for her secret life. 2 weeks later, Rico slipped him a small, tightly folded packet of paper during their shift change. "From my guy," he whispered, his eyes scanning the yard. "Be careful." Dre waited until lockdown, his hands shaking as he unfolded the packet in the privacy of his cell. It wasn't a letter. It was another set of photographs. The first showed Amanda and Spencer Reed leaving an office building together, laughing. Co-workers, he told himself, his heart pounding. Nothing more. The second showed them getting into a sleek silver Lexus. Spencer's car, he presumed. They were still talking, leaning close. The third was a gut punch. It was a shot taken through the window of a bar. They were sitting close in a dimly lit booth, their faces inches apart. Spencer's hand was on her arm. This wasn't a work dinner. The fourth and fifth photos shattered what was left of his world. They were taken at night, outside a modern upscale apartment building in Lincoln Park, a neighborhood so far removed from their South Side existence, It might as well have been on another planet. The first of the pair showed Spencer unlocking the main door, his arm around Amanda's waist as he pulled her close. The second showed them through a large fifth-floor window silhouetted against the light. They were kissing, a long, passionate kiss that left no room for interpretation. His breath hitched. He felt like he'd been physically struck. This wasn't a flirtation. This was a relationship. An entire life she was living behind his back. He thought of her visits, her strained smiles, her hollow promises. All of it had been a charade. She hadn't just moved on, she had replaced him, upgrading her life in every conceivable way, from her neighborhood to the man on her arm. The racial undertones were impossible to ignore. She had left the broke, incarcerated black man from the South Side for a wealthy, successful white lawyer from the North Side. He felt like a stereotype, a cliché in a story of betrayal he'd heard 1,000 times but never thought would be his own. He shuffled through the photos again, his vision blurred with tears of rage. And then he saw the last one. It was a close-up, a grainy shot of Amanda's left hand as she was getting out of the Lexus. Her original simple gold wedding band was gone. In its place on her ring finger was a diamond. It was a large, brilliant stone that glittered even in the poor quality of the spy photo. It was an engagement ring. The air left his lungs in a ragged gasp. The photos fell from his numb fingers and scattered across the concrete floor. It wasn't just an affair. She was going to marry this man. She was erasing Dre completely, writing him out of her life story, as if their 5 years together, their dreams, their struggles, had never existed. He wasn't just a husband in prison. He was an inconvenient past she was preparing to bury for good. Lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, Dre felt something inside him snap. The pain was so immense it transcended sorrow and curdled into something cold, hard, and sharp. The prison walls around him suddenly felt less like a cage holding him in, and more like a barrier keeping him from the one thing he now needed to do. He no longer cared about his sentence, about parole, about justice. All he could think about was the man in the picture, and the woman who had put that ring on her finger. He had to get out. Not to reclaim his life, but to confront the people who had stolen it. The decision, once made, settled in Andre's soul like a block of ice. The grief and shock hardened into a single, cold purpose: escape. The remaining years of his sentence no longer felt like a debt to be paid, but an obstacle to be overcome. He was a man with nothing left to lose, which, in a place like Statesville, made him incredibly dangerous. He needed a partner, someone who knew the prison's weaknesses, someone as desperate as he was. He found him in a man known only as Ghost. Ghost was a wiry, pale career criminal, serving a 20-year stretch for armed robbery. He was called Ghost because of his uncanny ability to move unseen and unheard, and for the 2 previous, albeit failed, escape attempts from lower security facilities that had earned him a spot in the maximum security hell of Statesville. He was a legend, a cautionary tale, and, for Andre, a potential key. Andre approached him in the yard, a place where such conversations were suicidal if overheard. He laid it out simply, sharing the photos of Amanda and Spencer, the story of his betrayal. He didn't ask for pity. He presented his motive as a cold, hard fact. "I have to get out," he finished, his voice devoid of emotion. "I need to look this man in the eye." Ghost studied him for a long moment, his pale blue eyes assessing Andre's resolve. "Revenge is a powerful motivator," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "But it makes you stupid. You get out for revenge, you'll be caught or killed within a week. You get out for freedom, you might have a chance. You gotta decide what you're running to, not just what you're running from." "I'm running to the truth," Andre replied, his jaw tight. That seemed to be enough for Ghost. He agreed to help, but on one condition. Once they were over the wall, they would split up immediately. No ties, no loyalties. Ghost's plan was audacious but meticulously crafted. He had spent years observing the prison's routines, identifying its Achilles heel, the commercial laundry service. Twice a week, a large, privately owned 18-wheeler would enter the prison's service annex to pick up thousands of pounds of soiled linens and uniforms. The truck was subjected to a cursory search on its way in and a weight check on its way out, but the sheer volume of laundry made a thorough inspection impossible. The weak point, Ghost explained, sketching a layout in the dirt with a stick, is the 5-minute window when the driver is inside signing the manifest. One guard watches the truck, but he's old, lazy. His attention is on the gatehouse, not the trailer. We get inside one of the large rolling carts buried under the laundry. They load us on. We ride it out. The plan was fraught with risk. They could be crushed by the other carts, discovered during a spot check, or suffocate under the weight of the linens. But it was a chance. Their preparations began in secret, a deadly serious game of logistics and deception. Andre used his position in the auto shop to swipe small tools, a piece of sharpened metal to cut a breathing hole, heavy grease to silence the squeaky wheels of a specific laundry cart they targeted. Ghost used his network to bribe an inmate working in the laundry with packs of cigarettes to ensure their chosen cart would be last on and positioned near the trailer door. As they plotted their escape, another man was starting his own methodical hunt. Detective Rossi of the Illinois State Police was 2 months from retirement. He was a relic from a different era of policing, a quiet, tenacious investigator who preferred shoe-leather detective work to computer algorithms. His partner was Shadow, a formidable black German shepherd, the best canine tracker in the state. The duo was legendary for their ability to follow the coldest of trails. Rossi was reviewing cold cases when the bulletin about the Statesville escape plan first came across his desk. Not Andre specifically, but general intel about potential weaknesses in the laundry system. He filed it away, a professional curiosity, never imagining he would soon be at the center of the manhunt it would spawn. The night of the escape was chosen for its chaos, the 4th of July. The guards would be distracted by the distant sounds of fireworks and the heightened tension that always came with holidays inside. Andre and Ghost slipped away from the general population during the evening count, a high-risk move that gave them a precious few hours before the alarm would be raised. They made their way through a series of service tunnels, a route Ghost had mapped in his mind over years of observation. The air was damp and smelled of decay. Every clank of a pipe, every drip of water, sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. They reached the laundry facility just as the truck was backing into the loading bay. They slipped into their designated cart, pulling bags of soiled, foul-smelling jumpsuits over themselves. The darkness was total, the stench overwhelming. Andre's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it. There was no turning back. They heard the clang of other carts being loaded onto the truck, then footsteps approaching their own. The cart began to move, rolling up the metal ramp into the trailer. A moment later, it shuddered to a stop. They were in. Suddenly, a voice boomed just outside the trailer. "Hold it! We're doing a spot check. Pop the doors on all of them." Andre's blood ran cold. A spot check. It was a random, fatal piece of bad luck. He and Ghost lay perfectly still, buried under the laundry, barely daring to breathe. They could hear the guards outside, their voices casual as they moved down the line of trucks in the bay. Footsteps clanged on the ramp of their trailer. A flashlight beam cut through a small gap in the laundry bags, dancing inches from Andre's face before moving on. "This one's the prison laundry, right?" a guard asked, his voice muffled. "Yeah, same as always," another replied, his voice filled with boredom. "Let's just weigh it and get it out of here. I want to see the fireworks." The trailer door slammed shut, plunging them back into absolute darkness. The sound of the lock engaging was the sweetest sound Andre had ever heard. The engine rumbled to life, the trailer vibrated, and slowly they began to move. They were rolling towards the main gate, towards the outside world. But the image of the flashlight beam, the casual indifference of the guard who had almost found them, was seared into his mind. They had escaped the prison, but he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that their freedom was hanging by the thinnest of threads. The journey inside the truck was a claustrophobic, swaying nightmare. The air was hot and stale, thick with the smell of industrial soap and human sweat. Every bump in the road was a jolt that threatened to shift their cover. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the truck slowed and turned, the sound of the highway fading. Ghost, who had been tracking the route by timing the turns, gave a signal. "This is it. The driver pulls over here for a smoke before he hits the interstate." Using the sharpened metal tool, they pried open the rear latch from the inside. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a dark, tree-lined service road. They tumbled out, landing hard on the gravel shoulder, and sprinted into the woods as the truck rumbled away, its driver oblivious. For the first time in over a year, Andre was outside prison walls. The air, cool and damp and smelling of pine, was intoxicating. But there was no time for relief. "This is where we split," Ghost said, his face a pale mask in the moonlight. "Head west. I'm going south. Don't look back." He melted into the shadows, and Andre was alone. Back at Statesville, all hell was breaking loose. The empty bunks had been discovered. Sirens screamed across the facility. Within the hour, a full-scale manhunt was underway. Detective Rossi was pulled from his paperwork and called to the scene. He arrived just before dawn, Shadow sitting alert and silent in the back of his SUV. While other officers set up roadblocks and scrambled helicopters, Rossi began his quiet work. He walked the perimeter, letting Shadow get a scent of the area. His instincts told him the escapees wouldn't use the obvious routes. He started at the laundry facility. "What's out of place?" he murmured to himself, his eyes scanning every detail. He found it near the loading bay, a small torn piece of a blue prison jumpsuit snagged on a metal latch. It was almost nothing, but it was enough. He knelt down and let Shadow take a long sniff of the fabric. The dog's demeanor changed instantly. Its body tensed, and with a low whine, it took off, nose to the ground, pulling Rossi along the path the laundry truck had taken. The hunt had begun. Andre, meanwhile, was moving through the pre-dawn gloom. His goal was Chicago, but he knew heading straight there was suicide. He needed to create a confusing trail. He followed a creek for 2 miles, the cold water numbing his feet, knowing it would help mask his scent. He emerged near a small farming town, where he stole clothes from a clothesline, a pair of worn jeans and a flannel shirt, and ditched the jumpsuit. He looked like any other transient worker. He managed to hop a freight train heading east, the clatter of the wheels a rhythmic soundtrack to his frantic thoughts. Every shadow looked like a police officer. Every distant siren, a signal of his imminent capture. The polarization of his new reality was jarring. He was free, surrounded by the open expanse of the Illinois prairie, yet he had never felt more hunted, more trapped. The entire state was now his prison. Rossi and Shadow were relentless. Shadow lost the scent at the creek, just as Andre had intended. But Rossi didn't give up. He drove to the nearest towns, talking to early-rising farmers and gas station attendants. A report of a stolen bicycle put them back on the trail. By midday, Shadow had picked up Andre's scent again near the railroad tracks. "Good boy," Rossi praised, giving the dog a pat. "He's on the move." Andre jumped from the train on the outskirts of Joliet, a sprawling suburb of Chicago. He needed to blend in, to become invisible. He made his way to the bus station, a bustling hub of humanity where a man on his own wouldn't draw a second glance. He kept his head down, his new clothes helping him disappear into the crowd of travelers and weary commuters. He bought a ticket for a bus heading north, not to Chicago, but to a smaller town nearby. One last misdirection. As he waited, a knot of tension tightened in his stomach. He felt a presence, a shift in the atmosphere of the station. He looked up and saw them across the terminal, a man in a simple jacket, older, with tired eyes that missed nothing, and beside him, a black German shepherd, sitting perfectly still, but with an intensity that was chilling. The dog's head was up, its nose testing the air. Andre knew, with a primal surge of fear, that it was the K9 unit. They had found him. The dog let out a soft whine and took a step forward, its gaze locking directly onto Andre. Detective Rossi's eyes followed, and for a split second, their gazes met across the crowded station. There was no accusation in the detective's eyes, just a calm, weary certainty. He had his man. Panic flared in Andre's chest. He couldn't run. It would cause a scene, and he'd be tackled in seconds. His bus was still 10 minutes from boarding. He was trapped. Then he saw it. On the adjacent track, a Metra commuter train bound for downtown Chicago was closing its doors, its bell ringing for departure. It was an insane gamble. He had no ticket, and the train was already moving. Without a second thought, he broke into a sprint. He heard a shout from behind him, Rossi's voice. He ignored it. He ran alongside the accelerating train, his lungs burning. He reached for a handrail, his fingers catching hold. With a surge of adrenaline, he pulled himself up and onto the steps of the last car, just as it cleared the platform. He clung to the outside of the train, the wind whipping at his face, and watched as Detective Rosie and his dog grew smaller in the distance. He had escaped, but it was a desperate, fleeting victory. He was now on a direct path to Chicago, the one place he was supposed to avoid, and he knew, with chilling certainty, that the old detective and his relentless dog would not be far behind. The train ride into Chicago was a blur of adrenaline and dread. Andre slipped into the train car at the first stop, blending in with the rush of commuters. He rode it all the way to Union Station, a marble and steel cathedral teeming with thousands of people, providing the perfect anonymity to swallow him whole. Stepping out into the familiar chaos of the city was surreal. It was his city, yet he was an alien in it, a fugitive whose face was likely already being broadcast on the evening news. He was a ghost, haunting the streets of his own life. His first priority was to disappear. He navigated the city's underbelly, the network of alleys and side streets he knew from his youth, and made his way to a dilapidated motel on the city's industrial west side. It was a no-questions-asked kind of place that smelled of mildew and regret. He paid for a week in cash, using a fake name, to a clerk who didn't even bother to look up from his crossword puzzle. The room was a small, grimy box with a sagging mattress and a single flickering fluorescent light. It was a far cry from the life he was seeking to confront, but for now, it was a sanctuary. His second priority was money. Before his arrest, in a moment of foresight, he was now profoundly grateful for. He had stashed nearly $1,000 in cash inside an old, hollowed-out car battery in a self-storage unit under his name. It was their emergency fund, a secret he'd never even told Amanda. Getting to it was a risk, but a necessary one. He spent the next day transforming himself. He bought a cheap pair of electric clippers and shaved his head, removing the distinctive dreadlocks he'd worn for years. He bought a pair of non-prescription glasses with thick black frames and secondhand clothes that were completely different from his usual style. Looking in the cracked mirror of the motel bathroom, he saw a stranger staring back, a gaunt, haunted man with fear in his eyes. The trip to the storage unit was nerve-wracking. He half expected a police stakeout, but the facility was deserted. He retrieved the cash without incident. With money in his pocket and a new face, he was ready for the final, most dangerous phase of his plan, finding Amanda and Spencer. He didn't go to their old apartment. He knew she wouldn't be there. Instead, he started with the address from the photos Rico had given him, the luxury high-rise in Lincoln Park. The contrast between his seedy motel and the building's gleaming glass and steel facade was a chasm. This was her new world, a world of doormen, manicured hedges, and whispered wealth. He was an intruder from a past she had tried to bury. He spent hours across the street, sitting in a small park, watching. He felt like a specter at the feast, invisible to the happy, successful people flowing in and out of the building. Then, late in the afternoon, he saw them. Spencer Reed emerged first, looking exactly as he had in the photos, tall, confident, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. And then Amanda stepped out behind him. Seeing her in person, not in a photograph, or through the distorted plexiglass of a prison visiting room, sent a jolt through him. She was different. Her hair was lighter, her clothes more elegant. She carried herself with a new kind of confidence, the kind that came from financial security and social standing. She laughed at something Spencer said, and the sound, once the most precious music to Andre's ears, was now a discordant note of betrayal. They got into Spencer's Lexus and drove away. A perfect couple living a perfect life. The rage that had been simmering inside him for months boiled over. It was a cold, hard fury. He had rotted in a cell for a crime he didn't commit, while she had simply moved on, upgraded, and forgotten him. That night, driven by a masochistic need to see what was left of his old life, he took the L train back to the south side. He stood across the street from the 3-flat apartment building where he and Amanda had lived. Their old window was dark. He slipped into the alley, his heart pounding, and scaled the familiar fire escape to the second floor. He expected the window to be locked, but it slid open with a soft groan. She hadn't even bothered to change the broken latch. He slipped inside. The apartment was eerily silent and empty. The furniture was gone, the walls were bare, and the air was stale with the smell of abandonment. They had been erased. He walked through the rooms that had once held all his hopes and dreams. In the bedroom where they had slept, he could almost still smell her perfume, a ghost of a memory. He had come here hoping to find some piece of his past, some connection to the life that had been stolen from him. But there was nothing. It was a hollowed-out shell. Then he saw it, On the dusty kitchen counter, left behind like a final, impersonal piece of trash, was a single manila envelope. His name was typed on the front. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a stack of legal documents. He didn't need to read the dense text to understand what they were. The bold letters at the top said it all. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It was a divorce petition. At the bottom of the last page, in the space for the petitioner's signature, was Amanda's familiar, elegant script. It was dated 6 months ago. She hadn't just been planning to leave him. She had already taken the steps to legally sever him from her life while still visiting him, still pretending to be his supportive wife. The lie was deeper, more calculated than he had ever imagined. He sank to the floor, the papers clutched in his hand. The last, fragile thread of the man he used to be, Andre Jackson, Amanda's husband, snapped. He was truly a ghost now, haunting a life that was no longer his. And a ghost has nothing left to lose. The divorce papers were a declaration of war. They transformed Andre's mission from one of confrontation to one of grim observation. He needed to understand. He needed to witness the life that had replaced his, to see the full scope of what he had lost before he did anything else. He became a shadow, his existence defined by the movements of Amanda and Spencer. His days fell into a bleak routine. He would wake in his squalid motel room, the chasm between his reality and theirs a yawning abyss. He'd take the train to Lincoln Park, a ghost commuting from the city's forgotten fringe to its gilded heart. He would sit for hours on a park bench, in a coffee shop, in the back of a library across the street, his eyes fixed on the entrance to their building. He learned their schedule. They left for work together at 7:45 a.m., Spencer in his suit, Amanda in her stylish office attire. They returned around 6:30 p.m., sometimes carrying groceries, sometimes heading back out for dinner. He watched them live the life that was supposed to have been his. He saw them jogging together by the lakefront, their bodies in sync, a picture of health and happiness. He saw Spencer kiss her goodbye in the morning, a casual, intimate gesture that felt like a physical blow to Andre. He saw them host friends on their balcony, the sound of their laughter drifting down to the street where he sat in the darkness, a solitary, unseen judge. The most agonizing part was the stark contrast, the brutal polarization of their worlds. He subsisted on cheap hot dogs and stale coffee, while they dined at restaurants with white tablecloths. He slept on a mattress stained with the failures of strangers, while they slept in a high-rise with panoramic views of the city skyline. He was a fugitive, a non-person with a fake name, while they were respected professionals, building a future, their lives moving inexorably forward. He wasn't just left behind. He was a relic of a past Amanda had meticulously purged. One evening, his surveillance took a more desperate turn. He followed them to a restaurant, taking a table in the back corner. He watched them over the rim of a water glass, his stomach churning. He could hear snippets of their conversation. They were planning a trip. Absolutely have to see the Amalfi Coast, Spencer was saying, his hand covering hers on the table. And a few days in Paris on the way back. A real honeymoon, Amanda said, her voice filled with a breathless excitement Andre hadn't heard in years. It sounds like a dream. Honeymoon. The word was a gunshot. They were getting married. The ring wasn't just a promise. It was a plan. One that was moving forward with or without a legal divorce from him. His presence, his very existence, was an inconvenience they were simply ignoring. He felt a surge of black, possessive rage. She was still his wife. In the eyes of the law, she was his. He left the restaurant, the food on his plate untouched, and walked for hours, the conversation replaying in his mind. The feeling of being erased was absolute. A few days later, he followed them on a Saturday afternoon to a stately brownstone in a wealthy suburb. A party was underway. Through the large bay window, he could see a gathering of well-dressed people. He watched as Spencer introduced Amanda to an older couple, his parents, Andre surmised. He saw the woman, Spencer's mother, embrace Amanda warmly. He saw the man, his father, shake her hand and smile. They welcomed her. They accepted her into their family, into their world of privilege and comfort. The scene was a tableau of everything he wasn't, everything he could never be for her. He was the black man from the South Side with a prison record. Spencer was the white lawyer from a good family. The system that had convicted him, the society that had judged him, was the same system that was now embracing her, rewarding her for leaving him behind. That was the moment his sanity finally fractured. It wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. It was about his entire life being invalidated, his love being treated as a stepping stone to something better. It was about being replaced not just in her bed, but in her entire social and economic reality. The grief, the pain, the injustice, it all coalesced into a singular, burning point of focus. He had seen enough. The period of observation was over. He was no longer content to just watch. He needed her to see him. He needed her to look him in the eye and explain how she could stand in that house, smiling with that family, while he, her husband, was a ghost haunting the edges of her perfect new life. He walked away from the brownstone, a new, colder purpose solidifying in his mind. He knew Spencer was scheduled for a one-day business trip to Milwaukee the following Tuesday, and he knew that he would be waiting for Amanda when she came home, alone. The time for watching was over. The time for a reckoning had begun. Tuesday arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity that mirrored the storm brewing inside Andre. He spent the day in a haze, the hours ticking by with agonizing slowness. He watched Spencer leave in the morning, briefcase in hand, kissing Amanda goodbye. The image was burned into his mind, another log on the pyre of his rage. He waited until dusk, until the city lights began to prick the darkening sky. He made his way to their building, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He slipped in behind a resident, bypassing the doorman, and took the stairs to the 5th floor, his footsteps silent on the carpeted steps. He stood before her door, apartment 512, and for a moment he hesitated. A flicker of the man he used to be, the man who loved this woman more than life itself, warned him to turn back. But the ghost he had become, fueled by betrayal and injustice, pushed him forward. He didn't knock. He knew she wouldn't open. Instead, he used a credit card to jimmy the lock, a trick he'd learned in the neighborhood long ago. It clicked open with sickening ease. He stepped inside. The apartment was immaculate, decorated in cool shades of gray and white. It was a stranger's home, sterile and impersonal, lacking any of the warmth their small apartment once had. He could hear the shower running in the back. He waited in the living room, a silent, menacing presence in the heart of her new life. When Amanda emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in a plush white robe, toweling her hair, she froze. The color drained from her face, her eyes widening in pure terror. A small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. "Dre," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Oh my God, how—" "The lock was broken," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound he barely recognized as his own. "You should get that fixed." She clutched the robe tighter around herself, taking an involuntary step back. "What do you want? The police are looking for you. You have to leave." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, taking a step toward her. "Not until we talk. I think you owe me that." The fear in her eyes was quickly being replaced by a defensive anger. "Owe you? I visited you. I wrote to you. I waited." "Waited?" he scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Is that what you call this?" He gestured around the expensive apartment. "Is this what waiting looks like? A new man, a new life, an engagement ring?" Her chin lifted defiantly. "I have a right to be happy, Dre. You were gone. 7 years. That's a lifetime. I couldn't just put my life on hold, waiting for a man who might never come back the same. The man who went in there is the same man who loved you, who would have done anything for you," he shot back, his voice rising. "The man who took a stupid, desperate job to pay our rent, to keep a roof over your head. You made a choice, Dre. You chose to get involved with Tony. You chose to break the law," she retorted, her voice trembling. "This isn't my fault." "Your fault," he said, advancing on her, his eyes blazing, "is the lies, the letters, the visits, pretending. While you were sleeping in his bed, you could have told me. You could have been honest. You could have sent me those divorce papers instead of letting me find them in our empty apartment like a piece of garbage you forgot to take out." Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of a cornered animal. "I didn't know how. I was scared. I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" he roared, his control finally snapping. He closed the distance between them and grabbed her by the arms, his grip like iron. "You think a letter would have hurt me more than this? More than finding out my whole life was a lie? You destroyed me, Amanda. Let go of me, she cried, struggling against his grip. You're scaring me, Dre. This isn't you. This is what you made me, he yelled, his face inches from hers. He could see the raw fear in her eyes now, and a dark, ugly part of him felt a grim satisfaction. He wanted her to be scared. He wanted her to feel a fraction of the terror and helplessness he had felt for the past 2 years. The sound of a key in the front door lock made them both freeze. The door swung open, and Spencer Reed stood in the doorway, his briefcase in his hand. His flight had been canceled. He'd caught an earlier one. He took in the scene in an instant. Amanda in her robe, crying, with a strange, menacing man gripping her arms. "Amanda, what the hell is going on?" Spencer asked, his eyes narrowing. He dropped his briefcase, his posture immediately shifting into a protective stance. "Get your hands off her." Andre released Amanda and turned to face his replacement. The man from the photographs was real, standing before him, the living embodiment of his betrayal. The two men stared at each other for a long, charged moment, the ghost from the past confronting the architect of the future. "Spencer, call the police," Amanda sobbed, stumbling back. But Spencer didn't move toward the phone. His eyes were locked on Andre's. "You must be the husband," he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. "You need to leave, now." "I'm not going anywhere," Andre snarled, "until I'm finished." The air in the room crackled with imminent violence. The confrontation Andre had dreamed of, the reckoning he had escaped prison for, was finally here. But it wasn't just between him and Amanda anymore. Her protector had come home, and in that moment, Andre knew this would not end with words. The living room became a pressure cooker of male aggression and raw emotion. Spencer, though physically smaller than Andre, stood his ground, positioning himself between Andre and Amanda. It was a foolishly brave gesture that only fueled Andre's fury. "This doesn't concern you," Andre growled, his attention fixed on Spencer. "This is between me and my wife. Anything that concerns her concerns me." Spencer shot back, his jaw tight. "You're a fugitive. You broke into her home. You assaulted her. You have no rights here." The word assaulted hit Andre like a physical blow. He saw the narrative solidifying in Spencer's eyes. The violent black intruder, the terrified white woman, the heroic white protector. The racial dynamics of the situation were a suffocating shroud. "You think you know what happened?" Andre snarled, taking a menacing step forward. "You have any idea what this woman did? The promises she made while she was crawling into your bed? Get out, Spencer yelled, pushing Amanda behind him. "I'm not going to tell you again." That was it. The last thread of Andre's control snapped. With a roar of pure, unadulterated rage, he lunged. He wasn't aiming for Spencer. He was aiming for the smug, privileged world he represented. He just wanted to smash it, to break something as thoroughly as he himself had been broken. Spencer, surprisingly quick, met his charge. The two men crashed into each other, a tangle of limbs and fury. They slammed against a wall, knocking a framed art print to the floor with a shatter of glass. Spencer was no fighter, but he was driven by a desperate need to protect Amanda. He wrapped his arms around Andre, trying to restrain him, to wrestle him to the ground. Andre, powered by years of prison yard survival instincts and raw adrenaline, was stronger. He threw Spencer off, sending him stumbling back over a coffee table. "Dre, stop it, please!" Amanda screamed, her voice shrill with terror. The sound of her voice, pleading for him, for the other man, was the final betrayal. It was proof that she had chosen her side. Panicked and desperate, Amanda backed away toward the open-plan kitchen. Her eyes darted around, looking for a weapon, an escape. Her hand found the cold, solid weight of a knife block on the granite countertop. Without thinking, she pulled out the largest one, a heavy chef's knife. "Get out of my house!" she shrieked, holding the knife out in front of her. It was a clumsy, terrified gesture, not an aggressive one, but in Andre's fractured state of mind, he saw only one thing. His wife, the woman he had loved, was threatening to kill him to protect her lover. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. "You'd kill me?" he whispered, a horrified, broken sound. "For him?" He started toward her, his hands raised. "Amanda, put the knife down." "Stay back," she sobbed, waving the blade wildly. From the floor, Spencer saw the glint of the knife and scrambled to his feet. "Amanda, no!" Everything happened in a chaotic, terrible instant. Andre lunged forward, not to attack her, but to disarm her, to get the knife away before she hurt herself or someone else. He grabbed her wrist, the one holding the blade. At the exact same moment, Spencer tackled Andre from the side, trying to pull him away from Amanda. The combined force sent all three of them crashing to the floor in a heap. Andre felt a sickening, jarring impact. He heard a sharp, guttural cry of pain that was abruptly cut off. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't Spencer's. He untangled himself, his ears ringing. He looked down. Spencer was on his hands and knees, staring in horror. Andre followed his gaze. Amanda was lying on her back on the polished hardwood floor. Her eyes were wide with a look of stunned surprise. In the center of her chest, just below her sternum, was the handle of the chef's knife. The front of her white robe was rapidly turning a deep, horrific crimson. In their fall, in the desperate three-way struggle, the knife had been turned inward. His lunge, Spencer's tackle, her resistance, it had all combined in one fatal, unintentional thrust. "No," Andre breathed, the word a puff of disbelief. The rage vanished, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread that was worse than anything he had ever felt. "No, no, no." He scrambled to her side, his hands hovering over the wound, useless. "Amanda, baby, look at me." Her lips moved, but no sound came out. A trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. Her eyes, which had held so much love, then so much fear, were starting to glaze over, losing their focus. "Someone call 911!" Spencer yelled, fumbling for his phone, his hands slick with a panic-induced sweat. But Andre wasn't listening. He was looking at Amanda's face, at the life draining out of her. He had escaped prison to find the truth, to seek a reckoning, and now here it was. In his frantic quest for justice for his stolen life, he had just stolen hers. The blade, intended for no one, had found the one person this whole tragic saga was about. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Spencer's panicked voice on the phone and the soft, final sigh that escaped Amanda's lips. The world slowed to a crawl. The frantic energy of the fight evaporated, leaving behind a thick, syrupy silence in the apartment, punctuated only by Spencer's ragged breaths as he spoke to the 911 operator. Andre knelt beside Amanda, his mind a blank slate of shock. The vibrant, complex woman he had loved, hated, and pursued was gone, replaced by a still, cooling shell. Her blood was on his hands, on his clothes, a stark testament to the final, catastrophic end of their story. He didn't think about running. There was nowhere left to run to. The purpose that had driven him, the burning rage that had fueled his escape, had been extinguished with Amanda's last breath. He was hollow, an empty vessel waiting for the inevitable. The sound of distant sirens grew steadily louder, a mournful symphony announcing his doom. He didn't flinch. He just stayed there, cradling Amanda's hand, which was already growing cold. The first officers to arrive were cautious, their guns drawn as they breached the apartment door. They found a scene of domestic carnage, shattered glass, overturned furniture, and two men frozen in a tableau of horror over a woman's body. "Police! Hands up! Get on the ground!" Spencer immediately complied, collapsing into a sobbing heap. Andre moved as if in a trance. He slowly raised his blood-stained hands, his eyes never leaving Amanda's face. He felt the cold press of steel as they cuffed him, the familiar, final click of the mechanism. It was over. Detective Rossi arrived minutes later. The call had come in as a homicide at the same address he'd been circling for days, a location pinpointed by a series of small tips and the instinct that his fugitive would be drawn back to the source of his pain. He walked into the apartment, his face grim, with Shadow at his side. The dog whined softly, sensing the death in the room, but sat obediently at Rossi's command. Rossi's tired eyes took in the scene. He saw the dead woman, the distraught man, who was clearly the lover, and finally he saw Andre, sitting in cuffs, his expression vacant. Their gazes met again, not across a crowded bus station, but across a crime scene. There was no triumph in the detective's eyes, only a profound, weary sadness. "Andre Jackson," Rossi said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm Detective Rossi. You're under arrest for the murder of Amanda Jackson." At the station, the interrogation room felt like a confessional. Andre, still in his bloodied clothes, told Rossi everything. He spoke in a monotone, recounting the story from the beginning. Tony's setup, the biased trial, the anonymous photos, the escape, the surveillance, and the final fatal confrontation. He didn't make excuses or ask for sympathy. He laid the facts out like pieces of a broken machine he was trying to understand. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said, his voice cracking for the first time. I wanted her to see me, to understand what she did. The knife, it was an accident." Rossi listened patiently, taking notes. "An accident that happened after you escaped a maximum security prison, stalked her for weeks, and broke into her home. That's a hard story to sell to a jury, son." "I know," Andre whispered, looking down at his cuffed hands. "Doesn't matter anymore." He was charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, escape, and a litany of other crimes. With Spencer's testimony and his own confession, the trial was a formality. His public defender argued for manslaughter, a crime of passion, but the prosecutor painted him as a cold, vengeful monster who had hunted his ex-wife down. The jury agreed. The verdict was life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The final scene of Andre's story of freedom was him being led back into the prison system, this time for good. He was returned to Statesville, no longer just another inmate, but a notorious one, the man who escaped to kill his wife. He was placed in solitary confinement, the silence and isolation a constant suffocating companion. In the crushing emptiness of his cell, the lesson of his life became brutally clear. It wasn't a lesson about a flawed justice system or the pain of betrayal. It was a lesson about choices. He had made a choice born of desperation when he took Tony's keys. That single error had set off a chain reaction, a series of ever-worsening decisions fueled by pride, rage, and a thirst for a justice he could never truly have. He could have served his time. He could have emerged a free, if broken man and tried to build a new life. He could have let Amanda go, accepting the bitter truth that love can die and people can change. Instead, he had chosen the path of vengeance, and in trying to reclaim a past that was already dead, he had annihilated any possibility of a future for himself, and, most tragically, for her. The prison walls were no longer his real prison. His cage was the memory of Amanda's face in that final moment, the endless replaying loop of his own fatal mistake. He had escaped one sentence only to be handed a harsher one, not by a judge, but by his own conscience. He was condemned to live out the rest of his days as a ghost, haunted not by the woman he had lost, but by the man he had become. The cold justice of the system was nothing compared to the cold, eternal justice of his own memory.